I buried my son today. Or so I thought. My daughter-in-law Chloe didn't show up for the funeral. Instead, she posted a picture from a beach in Cancun, a margarita in her hand, with the caption, "Enjoy life while you can." It was a level of cruelty I couldn't comprehend. But the real shock came hours later when my phone buzzed with a text from my son's number. A number that should have been silent forever. It had only 6 words, "Dad, come to my house now." Before I tell you what I found when I walked through that door, please let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far my son's story has traveled. And if you have ever had to find a strength you did not know you possessed for the sake of your family, please hit that like and subscribe button. Your support means more than you can imagine. The air in the funeral home was thick with the scent of lilies, a sweet, suffocating smell that I will now forever associate with lies. I stood beside the closed casket, a polished mahogany box that held nothing of my son Leo. Not his spirit, not his warmth, and now I suspected maybe not even him. My grief was a raw, physical ache in my chest, but it was being corroded by something else, something cold and sharp anger. My gaze kept drifting to the empty seat in the front row, the one reserved for the grieving widow. It wasn't just empty. It was a gaping wound in the fabric of the day, a silent scream of disrespect. Chloe was not here. To everyone else, she was the beautiful, heartbroken wife. To me, she had always been a predator in pastel dresses. I remembered a dinner just last year at my house. I'd been talking about my career as a certified public accountant, the satisfaction of bringing order to a chaotic world of numbers. Chloe had laughed, a tinkling sound, like breaking glass. She'd placed a perfectly manicured hand on Leo's arm and said, "Oh, James, that sounds so dreadfully boring." Leo is a creator, a visionary. He doesn't have time for spreadsheets. Leo had just smiled weakly, letting her speak for him, as she so often did. I saw it then, the subtle web she wove around him, isolating him one casual dismissal at a time. She didn't just want his money. She wanted to own his entire world, and there was no room in it for his old, boring father. Now whispers slithered through the pews behind me, quiet but sharp. "Where is Chloe?" a woman in a black hat murmured to her husband. "It's a shame. A young woman left all alone." An old friend of the family, a man I'd known for 30 years, caught my eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He knew. He saw it too. The performance of their marriage had always been for an audience, and now at the final curtain call, the star actress was nowhere to be found. The service was a blur of platitudes and empty reassurances. When it was over, and the room began to empty, I lingered for a moment, my hand resting on the cool, unforgiving wood of the casket. The grief was still there, but a cold resolve was beginning to crystallize around it. Something was profoundly wrong, and the empty chair where my daughter-in-law should have been crying was not a sign of sorrow, but a declaration of war. The silence in my house was heavier than the silence in the funeral home. There it had been filled with the shuffling of feet and muffled coughs. Here it was absolute, broken only by the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that usually comforted me but now felt like a countdown. I sank into my worn leather armchair, the events of the day washing over me in a gray, numbing wave. I picked up my phone, scrolling mindlessly through the screen, a desperate attempt to distract myself from the void that had opened up in my life. That's when a message from Bill, an old colleague, popped up. It just said, "James, I am so sorry for your loss. I don't know if I should be sending this, but I think you need to see it." Beneath the text was a screenshot. My breath caught in my chest. The image was painfully bright. The water was an aggressive, artificial blue. The sun was high and hot. And there, in the center of it all, was Chloe. She was wearing a tiny bikini, sunglasses pushed up on her head, and she was laughing. A wide, triumphant laugh. Her arm was thrown around our gardener Marco, who was grinning foolishly beside her. In her hand she held up a margarita, the salt on the rim sparkling in the sunlight. It was the caption at the bottom that felt like a physical blow, knocking the last of the air from my lungs. 3 little words posted just 2 hours ago while her husband's friends and family were gathered in mourning. Enjoy life while you can. I dropped the phone as if it had burned my hand. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. The sound was obscene in the crushing silence. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a young widow finding a moment of escape. This was a celebration, a victory lap. The love I'd seen her perform for my son was a lie, a carefully constructed facade to hide her contempt and greed. The sorrow in my chest was consumed by a white-hot rage that left no room for tears. It was a rage so pure it felt like clarity. And in that silent, rage-filled moment, the house was pierced by a single sharp sound. A ping. From my phone lying on the floor. I bent down, my hand trembling as I picked it up. The screen was illuminated, a small, bright rectangle in the dimming room. An unknown number, but the message itself was impossible. 6 words that rewrote my reality. Dad, come to my house now. The drive to Leo's house was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The familiar streets of his suburban Austin neighborhood, usually a source of quiet pride, now felt alien and menacing. Each manicured lawn and brightly lit window seemed to mock my turmoil, showcasing a normal life that had been ripped away from me only hours before. My mind, the orderly and logical mind of a retired CPA, was a maelstrom of impossible theories. Was it a cruel prank, a hacker who had gotten my son's old number? Or was my grief so profound that I was finally truly losing my grip on reality? I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the leather cool and smooth against my skin. I focused on that feeling, the one solid thing in a world that had dissolved into chaos. Every streetlight I passed was a blur of hazy gold, each one illuminating the frantic questions swirling in my head. I pulled into his driveway, parking behind Chloe's white SUV, a car I'd helped them buy. The house was dark, save for a single soft light glowing from the kitchen window at the back. It looked like a beacon in the oppressive darkness. For a moment, I just sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled. I thought about the text message again. Dad, come to my house now. It was so direct, so unlike the rambling emoji-filled texts Leo usually sent. It was a command, an urgent summons. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I got out of the car. The key felt heavy in my hand. It was the spare key Leo had given me years ago. Just in case, Dad, he'd said. I'd never had to use it. The trust it represented felt sacred now, a connection that Chloe, with all her machinations, could never sever. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent street. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was still and cool. I could smell the faint, cloying scent of Chloe's expensive perfume lingering in the entryway. The house was immaculate as always, a designer living room that looked more like a magazine spread than a place where people actually lived. Gray couches with perfectly placed pillows, a glass coffee table free of any clutter. It was Chloe's domain, a sterile monument to her impeccable taste, and I now realized her cold, empty heart. I walked slowly, cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the thick rug. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Leo. I called out, my voice a hoarse whisper. And there he was. He was sitting at the massive granite island in the kitchen, staring down at a glass of water, his silhouette framed by the soft light above. He looked up as I entered. He was alive. He was whole. He looked tired, lines of stress etched around his eyes that I'd never seen before, but he was undeniably, miraculously alive. The strength drained from my legs, and I had to grab the back of a dining chair to steady myself. All the impossible theories, all the frantic fear, it all evaporated, replaced by a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. He stood up. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice rough with emotion. We met in the middle of the room, and I pulled him into an embrace, holding my son, with a desperation that erased years of unspoken distance. I could feel the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. He was real. When we finally pulled apart, I looked at him, my mind still struggling to catch up. "The funeral, Leo," I stammered. "The casket. Everyone thinks you're gone." He nodded, his expression hardening. "I know, Dad. Sit down. I have to tell you everything." And so he did. The story spilled out of him, a torrent of betrayal and calculated cruelty. It started a few weeks ago. His car, a brand new Tesla, had been stolen from the parking garage of his office building. He filed a police report, frustrated but not overly concerned. The next evening, while working late at a coffee shop, he saw a news alert on his phone. A fiery crash on the highway. A single fatality, the driver burned beyond recognition. The car was his. The preliminary identification, based on the wallet found in the glove compartment, was him. His first instinct was to call Chloe to tell her he was okay, to stop the horrible mistake before it went any further. But she didn't answer. He called again, and again. Nothing. It was then, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach, that he got a notification from their joint bank account. A wire transfer. $100,000 moved to an account he didn't recognize. He checked his email and found another alert. A credit card, one he rarely used, had just been used to book a first-class flight to Cancun. For one person. Chloe. That's when he knew. The mistake wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was an opportunity. For her. He decided to wait. To watch. He stayed at a hotel under a false name and saw the news reports escalate. He watched as Chloe, the grieving widow, gave a tearful statement to the press. He saw her contact the morgue, and through a friend of a friend with connections, he learned that she had identified him based on a piece of jewelry, waiving the need for dental records because she was too distraught. It was a lie. A clean, devastating lie. She wanted him dead, and she was moving with ruthless efficiency to make it official. The final unforgivable act was her demand for a swift cremation. No viewing. A closed casket. She was literally and figuratively burning the evidence. She was erasing him not just from her life, but from existence, all to get her hands on his money and the life insurance policy he never knew she had taken out. As he spoke, the last of my grief was burned away by the cold fire of his words. This was no longer just a story of betrayal. It was the blueprint of a crime. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding the air, leaving my lungs in a ragged sigh. The initial overwhelming wave of relief at seeing my son alive began to recede, leaving behind the sharp, jagged edges of 100 questions. I looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing the exhaustion that went bone deep, the anger simmering in his eyes. "Why, Leo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why let me go through that, the funeral? I thought I had lost you. I thought I had lost everything." He had the decency to look away, shame clouding his features for a moment. "I know, Dad. I am so sorry for that. I can't imagine what that felt like. But when it happened, when I saw the news, I had to make a choice. And I had to do it alone just for a little while. I had to see." He guided me to a chair at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd seen him do his homework as a boy, and sat across from me. It started about a month ago. He began, his voice low and steady now, as if he were reciting a series of painful facts he had memorized. I was putting together the funds for a new angel investment, a startup I really believed in. When I went to transfer the capital from our main investment account, the balance was off. It was short. By a lot. He explained how he initially dismissed it, thinking it was a clerical error, a market fluctuation he'd missed. But the numbers didn't add up. As a software developer, he was used to finding patterns, to following digital trails. So he started digging. I stayed up all night, Dad, right here in my office. I ran a full diagnostic on our accounts, our network, and I found it. A hidden subroutine in our financial software. It was elegant, almost untraceable. Chloe must have hired someone to install it. The routine was siphoning money small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums, routing them through a series of shell corporations before they landed in a single untraceable account. An account in the Cayman Islands. He found over $2 million had been moved over the past 6 months, all disguised as vendor payments, art acquisitions, and charitable donations. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. It was like watching a stranger systematically dismantle my life from the inside, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. The woman I slept next to every night was robbing me blind. The financial betrayal was a deep wound, but what he discovered next was the salt that he poured into it. His suspicion led him to check their shared cloud storage where their emails were backed up. He found a deleted folder, one he was able to recover. It was full of messages between Chloe and Marco the gardener. They weren't just lovers, they were partners in crime. He described the sickening words he read, the casual cruelty of their messages. They referred to him as the golden goose, their nerdy ATM. They had detailed plans to continue draining his finances for another year before disappearing together, leaving him with a mountain of debt and a hollowed-out life. They mocked his habits, his passions, even the way he talked to me on the phone. He looked at me, then the hurt in his eyes so profound it was a physical presence in the room. That was the night before the car was stolen, Dad. I was sitting on this bomb. I didn't know what to do. Confront her, go to the police, and then the universe handed me the most terrible clarifying gift. When the news of his own death flashed across his screen, he knew. It was the ultimate test. If she loved him, she would be desperately trying to find him to correct the mistake. If she didn't, she would cash in. Her silence, followed by the flight to Cancun, was her answer. As he finished, the last vestiges of my shock burned away, replaced by the ice-cold precision of my professional life. The father in me was grieving for his son's broken heart, but the CPA in me saw the clear, stark lines of a federal crime. This isn't a divorce, Leo, I said, my voice firm and low. This is a conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The transfers to the Caymans, the false declarations to the authorities, that's a felony. And that life insurance policy you mentioned, that's insurance fraud on a massive scale. I looked at my son, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a flicker of the old fire in his eyes, the same determination he had when he was building his company. The victim was gone. We were no longer reacting. We were planning. She wanted you erased, I said, the words tasting like metal. Instead, we're going to build a case so perfect, so airtight, that by the time we're done, the only thing that will disappear is her freedom. The decision was made in the quiet, sterile kitchen of my son's home. The anger had burned away the shock, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. This was no longer just a family matter. It was a complex financial crime, and I knew we couldn't fight it alone. There was only one person I trusted enough to navigate these treacherous waters. Her name was Jessica Riley. I had known her since she was a little girl, the daughter of my oldest friend and college roommate. I had watched her grow from a precocious child who argued about her bedtime into one of the sharpest corporate lawyers in Austin. She had her father's integrity and a mind like a steel trap. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I found her number. It was past 11 at night, but I knew she would answer. She picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert, even at this late hour. James, is everything all right? I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Jessica, I need your help. It's about Leo. There was a pause on the other end, and I could picture her sitting up a little straighter. Of course, she said, her tone shifting from friendly to professionally focused. My office. 9 a.m. Clear your schedule. I hung up the phone and looked at Leo. For the first time in hours, a flicker of hope pierced through the darkness. The game had a new player. Jessica's office was on the 30th floor of a glass and steel tower that overlooked the city. It wasn't ostentatious, but it radiated quiet power and success. The walls were lined with books, not just for decoration, but the well-worn volumes of a mind constantly at work. She greeted us at the door herself, shaking my hand firmly and giving Leo a compassionate but steady look. She was exactly as I remembered her, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything and an aura of calm competence that immediately set us at ease. "James, Leo," she said, gesturing towards the leather chairs in front of her large oak desk. "Tell me everything. Start from the very beginning." And so we did. We spent the next hour laying out the whole sordid story. I took the lead on the financial details, the CPA in me emerging with a vengeance. I detailed the accounts, the timeline of the transfers, the exact amount, $2,150,000, that had been funneled to the Cayman Islands. Leo, his voice sometimes trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow, recounted the more personal betrayals. He told her about the emails, the mocking names they called him, their plan to abandon him. He described Chloe's chillingly efficient performance as the grieving widow, her rush to cremate her lies to the authorities. Throughout it all, Jessica listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer condolences. She just listened, her gaze fixed on us, her pen making sharp, precise notes on a yellow legal pad. The silence in the room when we finished was heavy with unspoken questions. Jessica leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. She looked from me to Leo and then back again. Finally, she spoke, her voice devoid of emotion, but filled with a steely certainty that was more comforting than any words of sympathy. "What your wife has done, Leo," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "is not just grounds for a very messy divorce. It is a series of calculated, premeditated felonies." She turned a page on her notepad. "The money transfers constitute felony wire fraud. Lying to the medical examiner and the police to confirm a false death is perjury and obstruction of justice. And this life insurance policy," she let out a low whistle, "that $5 million policy taken out just a month before the accident. That is attempted insurance fraud on a federal level. If she collects that money, she could spend a very, very long time in a place where there are no beaches or margaritas." A weight seemed to lift from Leo's shoulders. It was real. It was quantifiable. It had a name. "So we go to the police?" he asked, his voice eager. Jessica held up a hand. "No. Not yet," she said firmly. "If we go now, it's a complicated story. It becomes your word against the grieving widows. She'll claim she was confused, distraught, that she made a terrible mistake. Her lawyers will paint you as a cruel husband trying to frame her. We can't give her that opening." She leaned forward, and a flicker of something dangerous and brilliant lit up her eyes. "Instead, we are going to build a cage for her bar by ironclad bar. We are going to give her all the rope she needs to hang herself." The plan she laid out was as simple as it was ruthless. Leo would continue to be dead to the world. Jessica would officially step in as the executor of Leo's will, a document she would conveniently find and file with the court. She would be the one to communicate with Chloe from now on, guiding her through the process of claiming her inheritance. Every form Chloe signed, every claim she filed for the life insurance, every lie she told would be one more piece of evidence. "We will let her walk right into the trap, believing she's collecting her prize," Jessica concluded, her voice a low, determined hum. "We will document her greed every step of the way. And when she sits in this office, pen in hand, ready to sign the final document that she thinks will make her rich, we will have her, and she will have nowhere left to run." The days that followed were a blur of caffeine spreadsheets and quiet, relentless focus. Jessica's conference room became our war room. The large mahogany table was soon buried under stacks of bank statements, credit card bills, and legal documents. It felt strange, almost invigorating, to be back in my element. The skills I had honed over 40 years as a CPA, skills I thought I had packed away with my business suits, were now the most important weapons in our arsenal. It was an odd partnership. Me with my old-school methods of cross-referencing paper trails and a lifetime of understanding how people hide money, and Jessica's team, two sharp, tech-savvy paralegals who could navigate the digital world with a speed that left me breathless. Leo was the bridge between us, translating the complex code he'd found into plain English and pointing us toward the digital breadcrumbs Chloe had so arrogantly thought she'd erased. Our first major breakthrough came from a place I should have expected pure vanity. Leo remembered Chloe bragging about a new exclusive credit card she'd gotten, one that offered special travel perks. On a hunch, we pulled the statements, and there it was, nestled between a $5,000 charge for a handbag and a series of expensive spa treatments, was a single recurring monthly payment to a company called Pinnacle Life Assurance. It wasn't a large amount, just enough to be overlooked as a routine expense. But the name Pinnacle was a red flag. They specialized in high-value life insurance policies. My blood ran cold. I spent the next hour on the phone navigating the automated menus and corporate gatekeepers of Pinnacle, using my old CPA credentials to get the information we needed. Finally, a senior underwriter, after some persuasion from Jessica, confirmed our fears. A $5 million term life insurance policy, taken out on Leo Patterson. The beneficiary, his loving wife, Chloe Patterson. The date the policy was activated was the most damning piece of information of all. It was exactly 4 weeks before the car accident. The timing was too perfect, too precise to be a coincidence. It wasn't just a plan to leave him. It was a contingency plan for his death. I printed the policy documents, the cold, black and white ink a stark testament to her monstrous greed. I laid the paper on the table in front of Leo. He stared at it for a long time, his face a mask of disbelief. The woman who had sworn to love him in sickness and in health had put a price tag on his life. Each page of that document was another bar in the cage we were building around her. It was cold, hard proof of premeditation. With the insurance policy secured, we turned our full attention to the missing $2 million. This was a much more complex puzzle. Chloe, or whoever she had hired, had been clever. The money hadn't been moved in one lump sum. It had been bled out, funneled through a dizzying maze of shell corporations, with generic names like Global Consulting Ventures and Apex Holdings. It was a classic money laundering scheme designed to make the trail go cold. For days we hit dead ends. The money would move from a bank in Delaware to another in Nevada, then disappear into an offshore account in Cyprus, only to re-emerge in another shell company based in Panama. It was like trying to untangle 1,000 knotted fishing lines in the dark. The breakthrough came from Leo. He remembered an offhand comment Chloe had made months ago about her tech-illiterate mother needing help setting up a new email account. It was a lie, a cover story. Leo managed to gain access to that secondary forgotten email address. And there, buried in the spam folder, was our Rosetta Stone. It was a series of monthly account statements from a private bank in the Cayman Islands. A bank that specialized in discreet wealth management for an elite clientele. The statements were addressed to a trust, not to Chloe directly, but the listed trustee was a name we recognized from the emails Leo had found. Marco's cousin. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. It was the mistake we had been waiting for. We printed every single statement. The numbers on the pages confirmed everything. A steady flow of deposits perfectly matching the amounts that had vanished from Leo's accounts. The current balance $2,147,000. I stacked the printed statements into a neat, thick pile. Each page felt heavy-weighted with the gravity of her deception. We now had the motive, the method, and the means. The paper trail was complete, a perfect, unbroken chain of evidence leading directly from my son's hard work to her secret waiting fortune. With the paper trail complete, our case was strong. But Jessica, in her infinite wisdom, knew that numbers on a page were not enough. A jury needed a human story, a confession. And for that, we needed to turn our attention to the weak link in Chloe's chain, Marco the gardener. "Chloe is the queen," Jessica said one morning, tapping a pen on Marco's file. She's insulated and arrogant. But Marco is a pawn. And in chess, sometimes the best way to checkmate the queen is to take away her most valuable pawn. The plan was to isolate him, to sever his loyalty to Chloe by showing him the stark reality of his own future. Leo wanted to be there to confront the man who had conspired with his wife, but Jessica was firm. His presence would be an emotional complication. This required cold, surgical precision. I, however, insisted on attending. I would not be an active participant, but a silent witness. I needed to look the man in the eye who had laughed with my son's wife while I was at my son's funeral. We didn't summon him to Jessica's office. That was our territory, a place that would put him on guard. Instead, Jessica's firm rented a sterile, anonymous meeting room in a nondescript office building downtown. It was a room designed for nothing and everything, with a long polished table, uncomfortable chairs, and a pitcher of water that was already sweating in the cool air. It was a place with no memory and no soul, the perfect blank slate on which to dismantle a man's life. I sat at the table next to Jessica, a silent, gray-haired specter in a suit. We were a tableau of quiet authority. We waited. Marco arrived exactly on time, a detail that told me he wasn't taking this seriously. He thought it was a formality, a quick meeting with the estate lawyer about his final paycheck. He was dressed in a shirt that was a little too tight, a little too shiny, and he wore a cologne that announced his arrival before he did. He strolled in with a confident swagger, a smile plastered on his face. "Jessica Riley," he asked, extending a hand. Jessica shook it briefly, her own hand cool and firm. "Mr. Ramirez, thank you for coming. This is James Patterson, Leo's father." Marco's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he looked at me. I met his gaze and held at my expression, a flat, unreadable mask. I wanted him to feel the weight of my presence, the silent judgment of the father, whose son he had so carelessly betrayed. He quickly recovered, taking the single chair on the opposite side of the table. "Of course," he said, trying to regain his footing. "Terrible tragedy about Leo. Just terrible. Chloe is a wreck, an absolute wreck." The lie was so effortless, so smooth, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Jessica let the lie hang in the air for a moment before she began. Her approach was masterful. She started with simple, benign questions about his work. How long had he known the Pattersons? What were his duties? He answered easily, his confidence returning with each simple question. He was building a narrative of himself as the loyal, hard-working employee caught up in a tragic situation. He was weaving a web of sympathy, and Jessica was patiently handing him the thread. After 5 minutes of this, just as he was starting to relax, Jessica's entire demeanor shifted. The warmth vanished from her eyes, replaced by a focused, predatory intensity. She slowly pushed a single folder across the vast, empty table. "Mr. Ramirez," she said, her voice now clipped and precise. "Can you explain this?" Marco opened the folder. His confident smirk dissolved. I watched the color drain from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. Inside was a single document, the bank statement from the Cayman Islands Trust, clearly showing his cousin's name as the sole trustee. He stared at it, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what that is," he stammered, his eyes darting between me and Jessica, looking for an escape route where there was none. Jessica didn't even blink. "You don't?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. She slid a second, thicker folder across the table. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory." This folder contained the printed transcripts of his emails with Chloe. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. She read one of his own lines aloud, her voice dripping with contempt. "Don't worry about the nerdy ATM. The golden goose is almost ready to lay his final egg." That was the moment he broke. The carefully constructed facade of the loyal employee shattered, revealing the terrified, greedy little man underneath. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. He started to blubber, a torrent of denials and pathetic excuses. She made me do it. It was all her idea. I went along with it. I loved her. Jessica let him flail for a moment before cutting him off. Love has nothing to do with this, Marco. This is about choices. And right now you have two. She held up one finger. Door number 1. You remain loyal to Chloe. You will be indicted as a co-conspirator in federal wire fraud and insurance fraud. You will spend a fortune on a lawyer you cannot afford, and you will lose. You will be sentenced to a minimum of 10 to 15 years in a federal prison. She held up a second finger. Door number 2. You tell us everything. You give us every piece of paper, every text message, every single detail you have been holding back. You agree to testify under oath against Chloe. In return for your full and complete cooperation, I will speak with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I will make no promises, but it is possible we can arrange for a deal. Immunity, or at the very least a drastically reduced sentence. Probation, perhaps. She sat back, the offer hanging in the sterile air of the room. It was a lifeline, and we both knew he was going to take it. He collapsed in on himself, his bravado gone, replaced by frantic, terrified self-preservation. Okay, he whispered, his voice cracking. Okay, I'll do it. I'll tell you everything. He then gave us the final, unexpected gift. I have more, he said, his eyes wild. I have recordings. On my phone. I recorded some of our calls. Just in case. For insurance. Jessica and I exchanged a look. The pawn had just handed us the queen. The weeks that followed Marco's confession were the strangest of my life. It was a period of suspended animation, a deep breath taken before a final decisive plunge. Leo remained a ghost, living in a small, discreetly rented apartment across town. I became his lifeline to the outside world, bringing him groceries, news, and updates from our war room at Jessica's office. He was a prisoner in his own life, but it was a cage of his own choosing, one that would soon lead to his freedom. During this time, we watched Chloe's life unfold through the curated, sun-drenched lens of her Instagram feed. She was putting on a masterclass in performative bliss. There were pictures of her lounging by an infinity pool, a champagne flute always in hand. There were artfully arranged photos of exotic meals, shots of her laughing on a catamaran at sunset, her arm draped casually around Marco. Each post was a fresh stab of disgust, another layer of insult heaped upon our family's grief. But with each click of her camera, she was also tightening the noose around her own neck. Jessica's team meticulously documented every post, every callous caption, every triumphant smile. They were exhibits in a trial she didn't even know she was facing. Then one Tuesday, she came home. Marco, now our reluctant informant, sent a one-word text back. That evening I drove past Leo's house, my house, the one I had helped him put a down payment on. Her white SUV was gleaming in the driveway, and all the lights in the house were on. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't laying low. She was occupying the space like a conquering queen returning to her castle, utterly confident in her victory. She believed the game was over, that she had won. She had no idea the final, most important moves were just about to be played. The sight of that house, once a symbol of my son's success, now felt like a crime scene. But seeing it also steeled my resolve. The waiting was almost over. The trap was set. All we needed was for the prey to take the final step. The next morning, Leo and I sat in Jessica's conference room, the same room where our plan had been born. This time the mood was different. It was electric, with a tense, focused anticipation. Jessica sat at the head of the table, a picture of calm professionalism. She placed her phone on the table, took a deep breath, and dialed. She put the call on speakerphone for us to hear. It rang twice. Hello, Chloe's voice was crisp, impatient, the voice of someone who expected to be in charge. Ms. Patterson. This is Jessica Riley. Jessica said, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound helpful and slightly formal. I'm the attorney for the Patterson estate handling your late husband's affairs. There was a slight pause. Yes, Chloe's voice was sharp with poorly concealed eagerness. Is everything finalized? It's been weeks. I could hear the greed coiling in that single word. I understand your impatience, Jessica said smoothly. These things take time, but I'm happy to report we are in the final stages. The probate court has approved the will, and after some initial delays, the life insurance claim has been processed and approved as well. I watched Leo's hand clench into a fist on the table. Jessica continued, her voice a calm, steady drone of financial terms. We just need you to come into the office to sign a few final disbursement documents. Once we have your signature, we can authorize the transfer of all assets to your name. All assets, Chloe asked, her voice a little higher now. Yes, Jessica confirmed. That includes the full value of the estate, the stock portfolio, and of course the $5 million Pinnacle Life policy. Jessica said the number with a flat, bureaucratic finality, as if she were reading items from a grocery list. But to Chloe it was the sound of a jackpot. We heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She was trying to sound composed, but the avarice was leaking through. I see. And when would be a good time for me to come in? She asked, the words tripping over themselves in her haste. Jessica glanced at her calendar. I have an opening tomorrow afternoon. At 2 p.m. Will that work for you? Yes. Perfect. I'll be there, Chloe said, and then hung up without so much as a goodbye. Jessica ended the call, and a profound silence filled the room. It was done. The bait so shiny and irresistible had been taken without a moment's hesitation. I looked at my son. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, replaced by a somber resolve. For the next 24 hours, the world would continue to spin, but for us, time had stopped. We were in the final countdown. Jessica began to methodically arrange the folders on the table. One contained the fake documents for Chloe to sign. Another, much thicker folder contained the real evidence, the bank statements, the insurance policy, the transcripts of Marco's recordings. It was a complete and total chronicle of her deception. Tomorrow she would walk into this room expecting to sign her name to a fortune. Instead, she would be signing her confession. The day had arrived. The air in Jessica's conference room was still and heavy, charged with the electric potential of a storm about to break. I sat beside her at the long, polished table, a silent partner in this final act. We were two statues of patience waiting. The stage was set. On the table lay a thin leather folder containing the documents Chloe believed would make her a multimillionaire. Next to it sat a heavy, expensive fountain pen, an instrument of justice disguised as a tool of commerce. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of Austin bustled with life, oblivious to the quiet, momentous drama about to unfold on the 30th floor. I felt a profound, almost surreal calm. The anger that had fueled me for weeks had cooled, settling into a hard, dense certainty. Today the scales would be balanced. Chloe arrived at 2 o'clock on the dot. She swept into the room not like a grieving widow, but like a CEO arriving to close a major deal. She was dressed in a chic, understated black dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, and the tan she'd acquired in Cancun gave her a healthy, vibrant glow that was grotesque in its context. She was a vision of everything my son was not alive, thriving, and utterly untroubled. Her performance began immediately. She turned to me, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. James, she said, her voice a soft, sympathetic purr. Thank you for being here. I know how difficult this must be. For both of us. The hypocrisy was so audacious, so breathtaking, that all I could do was nod. I trusted that if I opened my mouth, only poison would come out. So I said nothing, simply meeting her gaze with a cold, flat stare that I hoped conveyed a fraction of my contempt. She turned her attention to Jessica, her demeanor shifting to one of brisk professional courtesy. Jessica. I assume everything is in order, she asked, gesturing toward the folder on the table. Jessica, ever the consummate professional, played her part to perfection. "Everything is in order, Ms. Patterson," she replied, her voice neutral. "We just require your signature on these final documents to authorize the full transfer of the estate's assets and the disbursement from the life insurance policy." Jessica opened the folder and spread the documents on the table, a series of pages filled with dense legal text. But I knew Chloe wasn't reading the words. She was only seeing the numbers, the long strings of zeros that represented her prize. "This first document finalizes the transfer of the primary estate, including the house and all physical assets," Jessica explained calmly. "This second one authorizes the liquidation and transfer of the stock portfolio. And this is the final claim verification for the Pinnacle Life policy." Chloe reached for the fountain pen, her movements smooth and deliberate. But I could see it. The slight tremor in her hand, the gleam of unrestrained avarice in her eyes as she looked at the signature line. This was it. The culmination of all her lies, her betrayal, her monstrous deception. She unscrewed the cap of the pen, the small sound echoing in the silent room. She positioned the nib over the paper, the black ink hovering just above the line that would make her a wealthy woman. She was smiling now, a small triumphant curve of her lips that she thought we couldn't see. She had won. And then, a soft click. The sound of the conference room door latch disengaging. It swung open silently, and my son walked in. He wasn't a specter. He wasn't a ghost. He was solid, real, dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a dark sweater. He looked directly at Chloe, his hands in his pockets, his expression not of anger, but of a deep, weary disappointment. Time itself seemed to stop. The pen dropped from Chloe's fingers, clattering onto the polished table, and leaving a small black spatter of ink on the pristine document. I watched her face, and it was like watching a beautiful porcelain mask crack and shatter in slow motion. The first emotion was simple, stunned confusion. Then her eyes widened in dawning, horrified disbelief. Her mind, so quick and cunning, was struggling to process an impossible reality. The color drained from her face, her carefully applied tan suddenly looking like a layer of yellowed varnish on a corpse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. A choked, gurgling noise caught in her throat. She was looking at a dead man. Leo took a slow step into the room, his gaze never leaving her. "Hello, Chloe," he said, his voice quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the silence like a shard of ice. Surprised to see me, she finally found her voice, a ragged, terrified whisper. "Leo. But you can't. I thought they told me you were—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The lie was too big, too heavy to be spoken in the presence of the living truth. Her eyes darted around the room from Leo to me to Jessica, a trapped animal searching for an escape that didn't exist. Jessica leaned forward, her voice as cold and hard as a judge's gavel. "We thought he should be present," she said, "when you attempted to sign away his entire life's work and collect $5 million on his death." As she spoke, the door opened again. A man in a plain gray suit stepped inside, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. They didn't move forward, but stood by the door, a silent, immovable wall of consequence. Chloe's panicked gaze fell upon them, and a whimper escaped her lips. The last of her composure crumbled. Jessica calmly reached for a thick stack of folders that had been sitting on the credenza. She placed the first one on the table. "Exhibit A," she announced, her voice resonating with absolute authority. "The complete, unredacted transaction records of your illegal wire transfers to the offshore account, registered to your accomplice's cousin in the Cayman Islands, totaling $2,147,000. She placed a second folder on top of the first. "Exhibit B, a sworn and notarized affidavit from your accomplice, Marco Ramirez, detailing your conspiracy from its inception." A sob broke from Chloe's throat. Jessica continued, relentless. "Exhibit C, audio recordings provided by Mr. Ramirez of your phone calls in which you refer to your husband as the Golden Goose and laugh about his impending financial ruin." Jessica paused, letting the weight of the words settle. She then picked up the insurance policy from the table. And finally, Exhibit D, the fraudulent life insurance policy you were seconds away from claiming. She looked directly at Chloe, her eyes devoid of any pity. Your greed was sloppy, Chloe. Lying to the Austin Police Department is a state crime. But filing a fraudulent claim for a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy, an act which crosses state lines and involves federally regulated institutions, that is a federal offense. The detective in the gray suit finally stepped forward. He moved with a calm deliberation that was more terrifying than any aggression. Chloe Patterson, he said, his voice calm and official, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and insurance fraud. The final beautiful, terrible sound was the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs as they closed around her wrists. I watched them lead her away, her mask of sophistication completely shattered, revealing the small, desperate, and pathetic truth of who she had always been. The game was over. She had lost. There was no shouting, no final desperate plea. Chloe was utterly broken. The fight had gone out of her the moment she saw Leo replaced by the stark, cold reality of her own monumental foolishness. I watched as the officers led her from the room. Her expensive dress seemed to hang off her a hollow costume. The confident, predatory woman who had walked in an hour before was gone, and in her place was a diminished, pathetic figure stripped of her power and her lies. The click of the conference room door shutting behind them was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of freedom. The room she left behind was a strange kind of sanctuary. The air, once thick with tension, now felt clean and light. I looked at the papers scattered on the table, the signed confessions and sworn statements that had become her undoing. The pen she had dropped lay next to the ink-spattered document, a silent monument to her failed conquest. Leo let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound that seemed to carry weeks of pain and uncertainty out of him. I put my hand on his shoulder, and we just stood there for a moment. Father and son, two survivors in the quiet aftermath of a war we never asked to fight. In the weeks and months that followed, the wheels of justice turned with a surprising swiftness. The evidence Jessica had compiled was so overwhelming, so irrefutable, that Chloe had no defense. Her high-priced lawyers attempted to build a narrative of a distraught, confused widow, but it crumbled under the weight of the Cayman Islands' bank accounts, Marco's damning audio recordings, and the simple, undeniable fact that her husband was alive. The trial was short. Chloe was found guilty on all federal counts. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for greed, sentenced her to 10 years in a federal correctional facility. It was a sentence that ensured she would be well into middle age before she was free again. Jessica was just as efficient in civil court. She filed to have the marriage annulled on the grounds of fraud, arguing successfully that the entire union was predicated on a lie. The court agreed. Legally, it was as if the marriage had never happened. Chloe's name was stripped from every deed, every account, every part of my son's life she had tried to steal. All assets were returned to their rightful owner. As for Marco, his cooperation was his salvation. He testified truthfully, his fear making him an exceptionally reliable witness. He received 2 years of probation and a hefty fine, a slap on the wrist, that would follow him for the rest of his life. Justice, I learned, isn't always a clean sweep. It is a series of precise, calculated adjustments, a slow but steady rebalancing of the scales. The storm has passed. It has been a few months now, and the silence that has returned to our lives is not the heavy, oppressive silence of before, but a clean, peaceful quiet. We are at a small, still lake an hour outside of Austin, my son and I. The afternoon sun is warm on our shoulders, and the only sounds are the gentle lap of water against our small boat and the rhythmic flick of our fishing lines cutting through the air. We don't speak of Chloe. Her name is a ghost that no longer has the power to haunt us, a closed chapter in a book we have put away for good. We don't speak of revenge or of justice. We have had our fill of both. Instead, we speak of the future. Leo tells me about a new software project he is working on, not for the money, but for the pure joy of creating something new. I see a spark in his eyes that I thought had been extinguished forever. He talks about perhaps traveling, seeing the parts of the world he has only read about, and maybe one day learning to trust again. But this time with his eyes wide open. I listen, and I feel a sense of profound peace settle over me. The goal was never to win, but to heal. And here in the quiet companionship between a father and his son is the undeniable proof of our victory. The easy silence that falls between us is comfortable, filled with everything that no longer needs to be said. He catches a small bass, and as he reels it in, a genuine, unburdened smile spreads across his face. That smile is worth more than all the money in the world. For most of my life, I believed that a father's love was a quiet thing, a foundation of silent endurance meant to absorb the blows of the world. I thought strength was in how much you could bear without breaking. But this long, painful ordeal has taught me a different, more profound lesson. I look at my son no longer a victim, but a survivor, a man reforged in a fire he never should have had to face, and I understand. Sometimes to protect the people you love, you cannot just endure the storm in silence. You must become the storm. Not a storm of blind rage and destruction, but one of cleansing purpose. A storm that exists only to tear down the lies, to wash away the poison, and to clear the suffocating air so that the sun can finally shine through again. And in that quiet moment, with my son by my side, and the line taut in my hand, all I could feel was the warmth of that sun on my face. And it was enough. It was everything. This story teaches us that true strength isn't merely the capacity to endure pain in silence, but the courage to take decisive, intelligent action when our loved ones are threatened. It shows that justice is not always a passive force. Sometimes it must be meticulously built with patience, evidence, and unwavering resolve. The ultimate victory was not found in revenge, but in the restoration of truth and the healing of a precious family bond. It's a powerful reminder that protecting family sometimes requires us to become the calm center of a storm we never wanted. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing for more. Let us know in the comments, what do you believe is the most important quality in protecting your family?